CPC Learning Network.
And I'm Florence from CPC Network.
And for the past several months, we've been convening this small but intellectually packed event to look at issues around children's care. This is the third part in a three-part symposium that the CPC Learning Network has been organizing. The first was in October, looking at issues of measurement around violence. The second was in February, looking at measuring social service workforce issues, which we co-hosted with the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. And this, the third and final, we're co-hosting with the Better Care Network. The theme throughout has been measurement and building evidence. What are the methods and ways that we look at building the evidence necessary for the policies and programs that will work most effectively for children? Care, of course, is a very broad subject area, and so Florence and I have subdivided that into three themes that we'll have one panel around each today, which are?
So the first panel is going to be really looking at measurement around children's situations, and in particular, children's situation, risk factors, vulnerability to separation, and to going into alternative care. The second panel is going to be looking at measuring the impact of interventions. So it's much more going to be looking at the research and the methodology to understand what interventions work in terms of children's care and in terms of preventing separation or children going into alternative care. And the third panel is going to be looking at children who are already in alternative care and the measurement issues in relation to those children and the challenges.
The event is recorded, so please know that you're on the record. And we will, if that does concern you, do let us know, and we can either redact portions of what is said or discuss from there. There is a microphone here, but that is simply for the purposes of the recording. So for those of you who are presenting, do please speak into it, but you don't need to hold it. It can just be on the podium as you present there, or on the table here. You'll see two logos here. A big thanks to USAID's Displaced Children and Orphans Fund, which has supported the CPC Learning Network and the Better Care Network for many, many years and have been crucial in getting both of these entities to be more stable and institutionalized, as well as the Oak Foundation, a Swiss foundation that has a child abuse program that has been a key donor in our center for many years. I think that's it for the starting.
For the introduction, yeah.
Actually,
The first presentation is really an attempt, first of all, to frame the discussion today and why are we talking about children's care. And secondly, to look, as Mark has said, to some initiative to look at global data sets, in particular MICS and DHS, which I'll talk a little bit more, to see what data do we have about children's care and how that data can be better used. And to frame the discussion, and I know everybody in this room is very familiar with the international framework, but the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Alternative Care Guidelines, I've summed up beautifully, really, what the children's care framework is, which is also the common sense framework, which is that we know that children do best in families, that the research is showing that, by and large, a family environment is the place where child development and child well-being is more secured, and that the efforts that states and parties, stakeholders, should be really primarily directed to keeping and enabling children to stay in their families, to prevent separation from families to the extent possible, to reintegrate children into families if there have been issues, and that reintegration is in the best interest of the child. And for the states to provide the support needed for families to be able to do their job properly in relation to children. I've also put in there, many of you will be very familiar with the US Government Action Plan on Children and Adversity adopted in 2012, because you'll see that in its principal objective 2, it recognizes the very same framework. It says, put family care first, and it talks about the support, in this case the US government, to support and enable families to care for their children and prevent unnecessary child-family separation and promote appropriate alternative care. And that is really the framework that is based by a great deal of evidence, both in terms of what works best for children in terms of their child well-being and in terms of development, but also what doesn't work for children and a body of research that has shown really that residential care in particular, non-family-based alternative care really do worse for children in terms of outcome. Briefly, I'm not going to go into this, I know you all know all of this, the body of research has looked at what impacts family care. So if we want to prevent children from being unnecessarily separated from their families, what is the research telling us? And there is quite an impressive body of research, although we would argue, and this is why in some ways we're here today, is that it remains quite fragmented to really understand the push and pull factors. But the research has showed poverty, and we're talking particularly in low and middle income countries, but it's also true, I'm sure, from the research in the United States. Poverty, the lack of access to services that come with that. Disability, in some countries the percentage of children in residential care is the majority of children with disability. Parental death and illness, and we'll talk a little bit about this, particularly HIV/AIDS. Family breakdown and restructure. The violence, abuse in the home. UNICEF just published an important report that shows the extent of violence in the family. So yes, family is definitely the best environment. That doesn't mean that it necessarily goes smoothly. It needs the support. Discrimination and social exclusion. We've got a lot of child abandonment. And we also have a lot of discrimination in which children are in residential care. Minorities in some countries are predominantly represented, overrepresented in residential care facilities. Migration and displacement, which is actually an area of research that's growing and very interesting. Of course, emergencies, which is the one that most people think when you're thinking of separation. Emergencies, conflict, or natural. But also inappropriate policies on institutionalization, the growth of residential care that is being pushed, and that has actually enormous pull factor for children growing into care, and the lack of family support services. There's a great deal of research that's backing this, but again, whether that research is sufficiently brought together and integrated is a question that we have. So briefly again, 4 major areas of interventions and international and national policies that are being pushed. Strengthening the capacity of parents and families to care. You've seen that is one of the objectives of the US government action plan. Preventing child-family separation. Reintegrating children into safe and nurturing families. Reintegration comes in with ensuring that the families are going to be able to care appropriately. And providing a continuum of appropriate alternative care option. And the alternative care guidelines define very well what that means and what are the priorities in relation to family-based and then family-like environment. And residential care having a role, but a very limited role. So who cares for children? If we're saying that families are best and we're saying that children should be in families and we should prevent separation, child-family separation, looking particularly at low and middle income countries here. And I know all of you will be very familiar, but just to briefly introduce what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the DHS and the MICS. We're talking about, with DHS, the Demographic and Health Survey, USAID. It's now entering phase 7. It's been conducted in over 19 countries. It's a global socio-demographic survey, so it looks at a whole range of indicators, going from fertility to safe water, living arrangements, survival. It's a very broad, global, and very key survey supported by USAID. MICS, Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, is a UNICEF-supported survey. It's been, since 1995, conducted in more than 100 countries. It includes the MDG, 20 of the MDG indicator. One of its main aim is to help countries measure how they're doing in relation to the MDGs. The last and most recent is MICS 5, which is, again, has just entered into phase. And it also has, you'll see questionnaires, the types of questionnaires they do. MICS is much more focused, as we could expect, on maternal and child health and well-being. So it has a particular angle that is much narrower in that sense than DHS. The two, though, collaborate very closely and use often similar question framework, although you'll see there's some issues, which means that actually these two surveys can be brought together on some key indicators, which is extremely useful. So in addition, what else do we know in terms of, there's been quite an enormous literature, I call it here the orphanhood literature, which has actually used some of this data, some of these data sets. Many of them have used the DHS in particular, some have used the MICS as well, looking at what's happening in terms of parents and in terms of care for children. And probably what's most famous, starting with Children on the Brink, has been in the context of HIV/AIDS and the pandemic. and the particular increase in children losing parents, and the impact that it had on the family functioning and on the children's care. There's been a number of studies that have looked at orphanhood and the relationship to certain well-being indicators, looking at particularly schooling, healthcare, and poverty, using national household surveys and using DHS and MICS in that context. But the studies actually have been mixed. There's been a whole bunch of studies that have shown that in terms of schooling, being an orphan is an important indicator. Although Belsley and Cher have also pointed out that part of the problem with the orphanhood data in the MICS and the DHS is the way orphanhood is defined as combining children who have actually lost one parent with children who have lost two parents. So people often think of orphans as children who've lost both parents, but actually the data that you see when is referred to orphan is actually children who've also lost one parent. Some studies have found that children who are orphaned are less likely to be enrolled in schools. There's a whole bunch of studies, I mentioned one here. Others, and more recent one, have actually showed that poverty is more of a closely linked to schooling than actually orphan status. So there's been a shift as well in understanding as to what really we can assign to parental death and what we need to assign to other key indicators. Some studies have found little evidence that OVC are disadvantaged in health, nutritional status, and healthcare compared to non-OVC. So again, the research is actually mixed. We often think, we assume necessarily that the research is clear-cut. It's not. Outcomes for orphans. Another study found that outcomes for orphans depend on the relatedness of orphans to their household head. So not necessarily parental death, but actually who you're living with. And analysis of living arrangement, another study advised analysis of living arrangement and changes in childcare patterns in both low and high HIV prevalence countries was needed. So a recognition, there's been a shift, I think, through the research, using these surveys, and a recognition that actually it is not just an orphanhood issue. It may not even be primarily an orphanhood issue, but it is a living arrangement issue. It is a care issue. And that's a little bit of what we've been working on. Most recently, UNICEF, in April 2014, has just produced, the HIV team, a very important report which really went back to the vulnerability criteria that the community, UNICEF, UNAIDS, and USAID have been using as to who are vulnerable children in an HIV/AIDS context. And what's really interesting about this study is it actually found that living arrangement is a strong marker of well-being, independent of orphanhood status. So in some ways it reaffirms what we've seen in the previous studies, that it's really who children are living with and in what context that really is a determinant of vulnerability rather than whether you've lost a parent. Orphanhood status was independently associated with some key outcomes, much less significant, I'm told, by the team that did this research. But again, the effect was distinct from living arrangement. I should add also that before living arrangement, there were also two key: household poverty, which was, we all know is a key indicators, and also the education of the adult in the household, which is also a key indicator. What was really important was that living arrangement for us in particular, that living arrangement came so strongly, because it really underlined that we actually need to understand far better what's going on in terms of children living. We need to go beyond just, are the parents alive or dead? And this is where the BCN and CP-MERG, I think most of you will be familiar with the Child Protection Monitoring and Evaluation group. And we have a subgroup which BCN is heading on actually measuring for children outside or without parental care or at risk of losing parental care. And I'll talk a little bit about this. But the aim of the initiative is really to try to support better data use, particularly using the MICS and the DHS, which are global as we've seen, to understand better those living arrangements. So we did that. We actually, the BCN and CPMERG, we went together and we actually extracted some of the data to make the case a couple of weeks ago. Oh my God. To make the case a couple of weeks ago that this is, and this data is absolutely key. And I'm just going to show you very briefly, because Mark is reminding me I'm in trouble, some of the key data we've pulled out for 94 countries, just to give you a sense of what it's telling us. This is about children living arrangements from 94 countries using both DHS and MICS. And what it shows you in blue is the children living with both parents. That's the good news, which is that the vast majority of children are still living with both parents. And you have some outliers out there, and it's not going to surprise you who they are. They're the very high prevalence HIV/AIDS countries, particularly in Southern Africa and some Eastern African countries. But you might be surprised by some of the others. Gabon is there. Interesting. Gabon's HIV is not the issue. And so you're going to see, as we look at the data, that the picture is much more complex. In red, you have children who have a single parent, both either a father or a mother, significant numbers. And in green there, you're looking at children who have neither. So children who actually do not have either parents, double orphans, if you want. Which are, again, quite a variety you can see, but you also see that in terms of numbers, we really are talking about a huge group of children whose living arrangement and vulnerability we need to understand. This is the orphanhood data for the same. And again, the picture is even clearer. When you're looking at orphanhood, blue are children who have both parents, red are children who have one parent has died, and the green, which you can hardly see there, I love to say that, is the orphanhood, children who have no parents, is the double orphanhood. Again, you see some differences. And if you go down there, you're not going to be surprised to see you've got high HIV prevalent countries, much more clearly at the end, but you've also got an interesting range of countries. This is about children who are not living with either of their parents. So that group that we saw at the beginning in green, children not living with either parents, this is actually looking at their status, parental status. And for children not living with either parent, so they're not living with a biological parent, you can see that actually the vast majority of children not living with a biological parent have parents. They have both parents. And this is the thing that surprises sometimes people. They assume if a child is not living with their parents, must be the parents are dead. But actually, no. You have a significant proportion that actually have only one single parent. And you've got a much smaller, with some outliers, which actually have lost both parents. But by and large, the data shows us that children who are not living with a biological parent have both parents. So the data that's being analyzed, and even doing this, putting it together, is really limited, and it stops there. And it usually is for high prevalent HIV/AIDS countries. The fact of pulling that data together actually hasn't happened as often as you would imagine. So what we've done for this project is we've looked at children not living with a biological parent, and we've started to extract more data to understand who are they living with. If they're not living with their parents, who are they with? That's the good news when we've done that, which is in red, this is related. And in blue, it's unrelated. And that's not going to be a surprise for anyone who does work in the child welfare system. The vast majority of children are living with relatives. When they're not living with their parents, they're living with relatives. But you'll see again some outliers and some strange countries. I wish I had the time to show you. There's some interesting countries that kind of raises a lot of questions. And this is saying, well, okay, so they're living with relatives, but which relative? Well, in blue, you're going to see something that I know everyone will immediately think of, grandparents. Grandparents are absolutely key to children's care when they're not living with their biological parents. And in red, you're going to see other relatives. Now, we've done further extraction, and actually the DHS and MICS extract and divide this further. And if I could show you at the time, I would show you that actually aunts and uncles are a significant part of that red bar. But unfortunately, right now, for reasons of consistency, some DHS collect that, others don't. So that's part of the challenge, is to get them to collect their data properly. I'm not going to show you this because Mark is going to share with me, but just briefly, from the wonderful DHS stats compiler, there's a huge diversity in terms of children's patterns of living. So this is actually for children living with their father only, even though their mother is alive. And this is West Africa region. And you're going to see that we have countries there that have actually a significant number of children living with their father, even though their mother is alive, which is actually unusual if you look at patterns. But even within West Africa, it's not all West African country. So it's very important to understand this, then to understand what are the implications. All of this is what are the implications to our programs, to our intervention. Zambia, another favorite of mine. The diversity is not simply looking at it at the regional or at the global level. It's within countries, enormous diversity. you look at the Western Zambia, almost 30% of children who are living with their mother, even though their father is alive. But if you were actually in northern Zambia, it would be 10%. That country has completely different living patterns from one region to another. So the diversity is enormous. I'm not going to go through this. Diversity, of course, in terms of rural, urban. Age matters. Who you're going to live with is going to depend in terms of your relatives, of your age. And we also have like sex, which shows your gender matters and your wealth matters, of course. So briefly, challenges with this data, it only covers children in household. This is why later on we're going to be talking about how do we better measure also for children who are outside of household. Nonetheless, this is a significant population of children. It's huge. The other thing as well is the data does not right now tell us really who the caregiver is. It tells us who they're living with, but it doesn't tell us whether that person actually is, that related person, whether it's a grandparent or whatever, is the actual caregiver. This is something that we think would be really key if we're going to aim on parenting or intervention or social protection intervention to caregivers. We need to understand who they are and how do we best support them. And there's issues with non-uniform reporting, which we're trying to address. So next, very briefly, CPMAG technical group, we had actually in this very room 2 weeks ago, had a meeting with a bunch of quite extraordinary people, expert in DHS and MICS, and also expert in care research. And there was a consensus that we needed to make better use. The data that I've shown you there is not being extracted. And countries need to extract it. They have the data, they're not extracting it. So we're going to make better use of existing data. And also, and there's a way we're going to do this together with the CPMAG technical working group, but also one of the things is actually improving the questionnaire, which is a slightly longer term option. And there was a consensus that needed to happen. If we are not capturing the caregivers, we need to capture them in the next round of MICS and DHS surveys. The fantastic news that we just heard is that DHS, literally after the meeting, it was one of these miracles, received approval from USAID for a new report on how household composition and relationship affect child outcomes. And that was really a miracle, because it's been a long time in fighting, and this is really wonderful. My message to you, publish data. Encourage academic research. This is really for us. All of this data is only useful, it's going to be used, it's going to be analyzed, it's going to be pulled out. And the implication to children's vulnerability is identifying the implication to programs. And that's really what today is about. And that's what we're looking forward to working with you. Thank you.